Hi. So, due to Covid-19, unfortunately my graduate project, which was scheduled to take place at the old fire station on the 30th of March, called Maya, was cancelled. This is in line with public health recommendations and the advice of the university. This is not something that I felt could be rescheduled, as we do not know what the situation will be in late April, May time. So instead, I had a contingency to set the project up in PG25 at the university. The university campus was then closed, so this was cancelled. So this is the contingency for my contingency. What we have done is we have cleared out my entire studio apartment, and we have set up a smaller version of the event in here. What this video is for is to take you behind the scenes on what went into the project, what the technical challenges we faced were, what we did to work around them, the sets, the multimedia aspects, how my crew would have operated, and basically giving you a feel for how the event would have looked in the old fire station. So, let's begin. So the first thing that would have happened is that guests would have arrived, and on arrival they'd be signed in by the front of house staff, and they would have been given a legal waiver to sign. Now, this is common practice amongst all escape rooms, and basically what it does is it negates all responsibility in the event of an accident or injury. The rules of the escape room are explained to the guests when they arrive as well, and reiterated by their event guide when he arrives. So basically, there's every opportunity for the guests to be totally aware of what's happening and what they can do to prevent injury. So that's great. Once that's done, the guide will arrive. He will greet the guests, bring them towards the main doors to enter into the fire station, into the event space, and give them a bit of exposition, tell them a little bit about what they can expect, make a few jokes, make the guests feel comfortable with them. They'll then enter the event space, and the first area they'll reach is this one. So we've got a door-like structure here and a pillar with a mask on it. The masks are our central antagonists for this whole event. The guide will begin then to deliver a series of exposition, filling them in with what the narrative is, the backstory. Just to roughly outline it, there's this is an ancient Mayan temple recently discovered by a team of archaeologists led by a guy called Sir Stephen Ainsbury. When they ventured inside the temple, they were unfortunately lost and trapped inside. Only Sir Stephen escaped, but when he did, he then quickly left without warning, and now the guests who have been brought in are a team of skilled archaeologists looking to free the trapped team from the temple. So whilst the guide delivers all this, suddenly there is a dramatic lighting change. And what this is, how we do this is by syncing a series of Alexa smart plugs connected to all of our lights up to a central Alexa, which we have sat on the table behind the scenes. And what we do is, using the Alexa app, would turn off the lighting manually, but I can do it by voice just now. So Alexa, turn off lighting. Then we would have our mask LEDs illuminate, and our floor lighting change to red. We would have a dramatic soundscape happen, and we would then have our first mask voiceover.
For 3,000 years we have slept, only to be awakened now. Those who venture into our temple will face our trials. If you succeed, you will be rewarded with riches beyond your imagination. If you fail, you will be sacrificed. Step forth now, and we will see if you mere mortals are worthy of our trials.
Great, so once that happens, we get our lights back on. So Alexa, lighting on. Alexa, lighting on. Great, and we're back to normal. So during this time, during this first voiceover, our main guide will have been trapped inside the temple. Will have heard a loud scream, and he would have been pulled behind the flats, or what it would have appeared to look like is that he was pulled behind this door. Upon doing so, the guests would find themselves alone, and suddenly this video, which had been halted on this thumbnail, would then play. Wow. So what this basically explains is that the guide is now trapped inside the temple. We made this by doing a green screen shoot. As you can see, we've keyed out this background and placed a nice temple interior behind the guide. When he steps out of frame towards the end of the video, this just hovers here for another 5 minutes or so to allow the guests to move into the next area and not feel like this isn't real. This is just a nice little piece, I thought, because obviously it's interactive, it's multimedia, and what's nice about it as well is that we actually have 2 guides for the experience. It would have been myself and another, and as the one you'll see in the POV video. And because the event was run with an overlap, the groups would run every half an hour, and the experience itself is 1 hour, so there would be a half-hour overlap in between. This allowed us to keep running those groups through with 2 guides. So dependent on which guide you got, you get a different video each time. So technically, you could do the same experience twice, and it would be slightly different both times. Great. So once this happens, the guests would then be told to go inside the main temple area, which you'll follow me over here. We can kind of demonstrate. Upon doing so, we have another dramatic lighting change, which I won't show. We'll just have the mask's LEDs come on, and we'll play the next mask voiceover.
You have chosen wisely. We will see if you have what it takes to solve our trials. Using all of your senses will be critical in solving the challenges that lay ahead. You will see an ancient chest as you enter.
It's the chest.
This chest contains our people's most prized treasure, the jewel of King Janab Pakal. If you are successful in all of our trials, we will gift you this most sacred treasure. Failure will be paid for in blood, in sacrifice. On the chest, you will see slots for 4 talismans.
These slots up here.
We have provided you with 1 talisman.
These are the talismans. They would have had
The
1.
other 3 will be given to you as a reward for solving the other trials.
Great. So this again just sets up the basic principle for what they can expect to come in the main series of the event. We've been introduced to the box. This box is locked, and there's slots for 4 talismans on top. So the guests probably will try and open the box, they'll be unable to, and the reason is that we have a solenoid lock pistoned into the box here, which is preventing it from being opened. We have in the top container here an Arduino, and this is synced up to an RFID plate. And on our final talisman that's given to the guests, as they are numbered on top of here, this has an RFID card on the back of it. Now, what happens with this is that when it's placed onto the RFID plate, it triggers the solenoid lock, which pulls back, releasing the case. So if we take our talismans off, you'll be able to see the solenoid lock underneath, and inside obviously we have our treasure. All of the props and sets were handmade by us. We sourced the materials from various places. Everything was painted, designed, decorated by us, assembled by us. All of the technology and the Arduino aspects were all coded and built and soldered by us. The LEDs that you see in the masks were spliced into a circuit. They're run off an external battery pack that's switched on and off. So everything you see here is handmade, painstakingly. And obviously in the last voiceover that we heard a little bit of history about the jewel of the King Janab Pakal. Now he was an actual mine king, and the actual door that we have here is the design of which is based on his tombstone. So something that was important to me when I designed and scripted out the room was keeping a little bit of the actual history of the Mayan Empire in, and a bit of a nod to their culture as well. And this is seen also across like the social media, the promotional campaign that accompanied the event. We did a fact of the week every time to just try and educate people as we sort of went along. So we've been introduced to the basic concept of the game now. We know that they need to solve trials in order to win talismans, in order to open the chest, gain the jewel, and win their freedom. If they fail, they're sacrificed. So at this point, our guide reintroduces himself through a series of holes cut in the wall where he can put his hand through and wave. And this introduces another core element of escape rooms, which is this helpful guide, tips and tricks kind of aspect. So if they're struggling, they can say, "Help us, we need help." The guide will then be able to communicate with them and provide any tips or hints to help with the puzzles. We've already had one talisman placed on. At this point, we'd have another dramatic lighting change, and we would cue the next voiceover for the masks.
For this first trial, you must hear the voices of our ancestors. Their voices can be heard whispering through the walls of this very temple. Listen to their message. Speak their words. Only then will you proceed to the next trial.
Great, so this first puzzle is an audio-based puzzle, and the way we wanted to make this room feel is very sensory. We wanted to hit different senses with different elements and aspects. So, for example, in the very design of the room itself, we've got the vines hanging down. These are meant to feel very sort of like in your face, like you're in a jungle. We've got I'll take you through a bit about the design of the room. So obviously we've got the flats back here. Now these are made using upholstery fabric, which is fire retardant for health and safety reasons, attached to a series of rods at the top and bottom to create a scroll. And then these are suspended using gardening twine. And then obviously in the fire station, this would have been suspended to the rigging, and here we just got it run off a series of poles. Now, we've used about 15 scrolls just in this room. We had 200 for the fire station that we'd pre-made and built, as well as more pillars, more props, more everything, more vines. So you can imagine this on a grand scale would have felt very immersive and very sort of stepping into a new world, which is the design we went for. We also would have had a series of wood chips placed on the entirety of the floor, and this adds a dual purpose in that the feel under your feet as you're walking would have had a nice sort of crunchy feel, but also the smell would have introduced you to, again, that sort of jungle nature element. And speaking of smells, even in the smoke, which we pump into the room constantly using a haze, to create a haze in the room, that has a tropical scent in it. So that combined with the wood chips would have given you a very sort of rainforesty sort of feel. So the first puzzle that we've been introduced to, we know they have to hear the words of the elders. So what we actually had set up around the space is a series of small speakers. You can see one of which is down here. These would have, little Bluetooth speakers would have been placed around the walls of the temple, and these would have been synced up to phones using Bluetooth, and we would have played a jumbled message through them. So if I can hear like whisper 1 and whisper 2, 3 and 4. Thank you. Pause those. So these were actually made from one recording that we pitch shifted and jumbled up. These would have been played around the walls to make you feel like the walls themselves were talking to you as the ancient spirits that came before you. The guests would have to listen to these messages, assemble it into one sentence, and speak it out loud. So this would have eventually come for them to say, to find the jewel is to find its curse. Now when they spoke these words, they get a big success sound. All of the lighting would have gotten brighter. It would have been a very sort of angelic, magical moment. And this would trigger the next series of dialogue. If they'd failed, however, we would have gotten a failure sound effect. Okay, and this again signifies that they've got it wrong without having to ask the guide, you know, why isn't it working? Why have we done something wrong? It's a very audio-visual sense of them being like, yes, we did it right, or no, we did it wrong. So upon doing so, it would trigger the next series of mask dialogue.
You have spoken the words of our ancestors and should heed their warning. For your next task, you will see the mask of the elders, still worn by one who came before. You must take this mask and see through its eyes. The elders will show you visions. You must use these visions to arrange the mosaic tiles located in the temple in the right order in the center of the chamber. Only then will you receive your next talisman.
Great. So before we quickly move on to the next trial, I just wanted to mention that what you can hear in the background is our soundscape. Now we have 3 different soundscapes that we actually would use throughout the project, and you'll see this on the POV video. The one you're hearing now is our jungle soundscape, and this would play all around the space, and this is to again help with that level of immersion. The second soundscape you hear is our cave soundscape. This is what would play inside the temple. And our third soundscape is our temple crashing soundscape, which would happen towards the end of the experience to signify that time is running out and you need to get a move on, basically. Then the masks themselves, their voiceover, that would have been spread mainly across the pillars to make it feel like all the sounds that you hear, the voiceover, is coming from each individual mask. Obviously we can't do that in this space as it's quite small, but so you'll have to take my word that that's how it would have come out. So great, the next puzzle, again, is slightly different. As I said, we're going for sensory stuff, so we've done an audio challenge. This is our visual challenge. So if you come down here, we have our temple VR mask sported by our model Graham. So Graham is a life-size skeleton, and he is the one who came before. So the idea being that there was another explorer who came along trying to solve the puzzles. He put on the VR mask and failed, and he was sacrificed, unfortunately. So as you can see, this is our VR mask here. Again, a handmade prop. We've got a phone in here run with a USB-C to a power pack underneath, so it can be powered all day. This is showing a YouTube video that we have in VR mode on a loop of a series of stock footage of animals eating other things and other animals, linked together with a lot of After Effects work put into it, which we can show you in a bit, or I'll probably put side by side up in the top corner. And then as you can see, we have our mosaic tiles down here as well. So as part of this puzzle, the guests need to find all of the mosaic tiles. They need to arrange them on the floor in the correct order. Now the clues we have is obviously Graham is wearing some chains. We have chains in the video. We have animals eating each other. So this is of course the food chain. They need to find all of the tiles which are dotted around the space. Now, as I mentioned, we had wood chips initially planned to go down on the floor. Some of the tiles actually would have been hidden underneath the wood chips, and this would have given them a sort of, rummaging around element. They would have gotten their hands a little bit dirty, and sorry, let me just readjust this on our cameraman. Okay. This would have given us, again, a very immersive feeling, getting your hands inside that jungle element and pulling them out. All the props that are sort of buried and that kind of thing, and the talismans, we have protected with a slight glaze, and they are made of sort of hard wood, with the idea being that, if guests were a bit rough with them or dropped them or banged them against things, they're not going to break, because something that was important to us is that we had almost 22 slots for one day for groups to come through. If a group came through and broke all of the props on the first run through, we've got nothing for the next group. So everything we built had to be built with a bit of to take a bit of damage, basically, which was a good sort of plan. So that's fine. We'll just move this. Okay, so once the guests had solved this trial, or hadn't solved this trial, they'd be greeted with one of 2 voiceovers. So they would have been given the next voiceover, which was failure.
You have neglected the wisdom of the elders. You must try again. Remember, failure results in death.
And obviously this would have been coupled with our failure sound effect, or they would have been given success, which sounded like this.
You have heeded the wisdom of the elders and have earned another talisman. Now prepare yourselves for the final challenge.
Great, so we've got 3 so far. And the reason we've got a gap now is so the guide can say, well done team, here's another talisman, gives the guests their talisman, they place it on the chest, maybe have a bit of exchange, the team gets to pat themselves on the back, and then we move on to the final challenge, which is...
Your final challenge awaits you. Solve our riddle in order to complete the trials. Fail, and death awaits you. The riddle is as follows. We are the lost souls of our people. We cannot leave this place without the help of others. If you breathe life into us, we may leave this place, as may you. Solve this final trial, and you will earn your freedom.
So as we mentioned before, the last 2 trials have been very an audio trial and a visual trial. This one is a combination of sort of everything, with a bit of touch involved as well. So the masks will stay on at this point after the final VO has played, letting you know the challenge is happening. And what guests will notice is that one of our pillars is not illuminated. And upon closer inspection, they'll also notice that there's a hole at the bottom of the mask. Now, the VO mentioned that they needed to breathe life into them in order to complete this challenge. And what this basically entails is that the guests need to blow into the mask. What we have inside the mask is a sound sensor connected to an Arduino circuit powered off its own supply. And what we realized is that when you obviously are working with microphones, one of the worst things that can happen to them is people blow into them. It creates a horrible distorted peaking noise that's actually a lot louder than anything else you can reasonably produce. Similar to this are claps. Claps do the same effect. That's why they use them for sound syncing. So we found that actually if you use the same circuit that someone would use for a light switch on a clap circuit, you would actually be able to do this with blowing as well. So it should work if I clap. You can see the lights start to illuminate, but this isn't even enough. So even if there's outside noise in the experience, we know that it won't trigger this sound sensor which is on during the entire experience. However, if I come up to the mask and blow into it, third time's the charm, it turns on. So again, this is a really fun little puzzle. It's pretty foolproof. We've not had any experiences with it where it hasn't worked. Again, what's so important is that we want all of this tech to be foolproof so that we don't have to get involved or try and fix anything and take guests out of that experience. So this is a really great puzzle. It always works and it's always great fun. And whenever guests solve it and people that we've had in test runs, they've gone, that's really, really cool. So that's all the challenges completed. We did get a big successful magical sound, and the final voiceover would then play.
You have shared your life force with us. We are now able to leave this temple. You have completed all of the trials, and as a reward, we gift you the last talisman. Now claim your prize, and be gone from here!
So this would then trigger our final soundscape where we'd feel the temple start to crumble, the music would get more intense, we'd have something very tribal playing, the guide would come running in now that he's free and he would give the guest the last talisman. This would be placed on the chest, unlocking it. The guide would get them to remove all the talismans. They'd open the chest, grab the jewel, be very pleased with themselves, and the guide would very quickly get them to exit the temple before it comes crushing down on them. So what we would then have is they would leave the temple, we'd have a big pillar of smoke appear behind them as the door closed, and they would have won. or so they thought. After they turn around from leaving the temple, we would have our final antagonist appear, Sir Stephen Ainsbury. So Stephen would have his gun pointed at the guests and the guide, and would then deliver a lengthy monologue to explain where he's been, and how he trapped his crew inside the temple, and went to find all of the secrets of the Mayan peoples, and how he could use the jewel to basically conquer the world. So he demands that the group hands over the jewel to him. And obviously what we considered would probably happen at this time is the guests would not want to give the jewel over to Sir Stephen because he's a villain. Maybe they would, and that would be great. But as a contingency for this, we planned that the guide would turn to the guests and say, "Here, give it to me, I've got a plan." And because they build up a level of trust with the guide, they give the jewel to him. The guide then delivers the jewel straight to Sir Stephen with a very apologetic line of, "I'm sorry team, but I had to do it. We've come this far and it can't end here." So Stephen would then, very happy with himself, tell the team to get out of here before he changes his mind and shoots them. And as they leave, the guide would turn to the guests and say, "Don't worry team, look, we're going to come back, we'll be back for the jewel, we'll get Sir Stephen." And this opens up the whole experience to serialization and the possibility of a sequel, which, as you can see in the paperwork, is one of the main selling points of this experience. And that's it, that's the whole experience of Maya finished off and wrapped up. So before I end this video, I just want to take you behind the scenes, look at some of the tech that went into this. So if we come round here, you can see we have our table with all our tech. First thing I'll show you is how we can see how we would have seen what was going on in the experience. So Alexa, show me master bedroom.
Okay.
So whilst this is loading, this is our camera up here. It's a little smart home security camera. We would position this looking inside the main temple room, and as you can see, we've got our live feed up here now. This tracks movement, audio. It has a night vision mode for especially when we use the lighting changes where it gets darker. And this allows us to see exactly what's going on in the room, but most importantly, if there's an issue or something's going wrong or we need to trigger something manually, we can do so using this as a reference. So that's that. As you can see here, we have our VR video, just for demonstration purposes. So this gives you an idea of what was actually going on inside the headset. So you can see our graphic videos of our animals eating each other. We have our walkie-talkies. This allows us to communicate across the space because there might be times where one of us has to run over and do something and we need to talk quietly without having to shout. This is the best way to do that. We have our series of remote controls, and we have our mobile devices. So we have one which has a soundboard on it for all of our masks, so we can play these.
You have neglected the wisdom of...
And this allows us to basically easily play and repeat things whenever we need to, or whenever using the video guide we feel they need to happen. This is much easier than using it just on a simple music player system, so we don't have to scroll back to the beginning of clips, and we can scroll down and trigger things really quickly and easily. We have our Alexa app, which allows us to do things like change the color of our LEDs manually. We can turn things on, turn things off, without having to actually say the commands to Alexa, which the guests might hear in the experience. And that's pretty much everything. One thing I wanted to mention, I'll come over here so the cameraman has an easy job, is that this wasn't just about the experience Maya specifically in the main event space. I'd rented out the entire fire station for a purpose, to make this a whole event, not just an experience. So when the guests finished their Maya experience specifically, the guide would take them upstairs, and what we'd sorted out upstairs is I booked over 12 DJs who would come in and play across the day with a really nice, fun, immersive set, very jungle themed, so that guests could go upstairs, they could have a drink, they could relax to some music, maybe have a dance, detox, talk about their experience, and continue it in that space. Talk to other groups that had also done the experience, compare, see what other groups had found of it. And I think that's a social aspect that we're really missing currently from escape rooms. I'd also organised food to be sold there, so I'd spoken to one of the societies at BU, the Baking Society. they'd organised to bake a series of jungle-themed pastries and cakes available for all people to purchase, which supports their society and also is nice for the event. So basically, yeah, we had other stuff planned that was going on there as well, you know, and it's a real shame because I can't show that here because it's something completely different. It goes more into event management. But yeah, for me, it wasn't just about making this Maya heavy, and it's all about the experience, because what happens, I find, with escape rooms is you do them and then you just leave. But this isn't about that. It's about continuing that experience in a social setting afterwards. So one of the things that we discussed in the behind the scenes video was some of the Arduino puzzles that we had. I wanted to take this opportunity to just look a little bit more in depth at what goes into them and what's behind the scenes. So we've talked about the mask puzzle. This just looks like one of the other masks on the pillars, except when you blow it into the mouthpiece, the LEDs illuminate red, as so. So what I'm going to do is turn this around so we can have a look at what's inside. So if you want to come in close. Great, so as you can see behind here, we've got the cables going to the lights just here, and this is then the cables coming back from them to complete the circuit. In the mouthpiece, we've got our sound sensor. This is routed into a little breadboard coming into our Arduino. And yeah, this is then powered onto a separate circuit. So we've hand soldered all of these little pieces in. We've got our resistor here. And what we have to do is connect this connection into our computer and upload the code from the Arduino software onto the actual plate in here. And that is what runs the puzzle. So one of the other Arduino puzzles that I wanted to look at a little bit more in depth is the box. So if we unscrew these two corners and we lift it off very gently, you can see that we have underneath our Arduino here, and we also that's a microphone in my hair. We have our Arduino here. We have our RFID plate here. So this is directly underneath the final talisman position. So when these two interact, it sends a signal into our Arduino, which basically we've then coded inside the Arduino software. Each RFID card and chip has an individual identity. What we've done is we've allowed for the one on the back of the talisman to activate our transmitter here, which is run off of a separate battery pack, which you can see included here. This sends a signal to our solenoid, which is located underneath it here, which is secured in the hole that we've drilled in there. And so when they place the final talisman on this plate, the box opens.